safety. We'll kind of combine the secondary here. Jack Kerner was involved with the boating accident over a year ago, right? And he was very fortunate to get out of that incident alive. First and foremost, and then Kayvon Merriweather really progressed last year. I thought he was one of the more improved players last year, and really was a vocalist for some of the positive changes that I think have occurred within the Iowa program thus far. Have heard good things about Sebastian Castro and Quinn Schulte. But again, I think you want Kerner and Merriweather to stay healthy. We had Jovan Johnson, former Iowa all Big Ten cornerback, on a couple months back, and he made a pretty lofty comparison with Kayvon Merriweather, comparing him to Bob Sanders. That is a very, very lofty comparison, but those were Jovan's words, not mine. So I think safety, you got to feel good. Again, hopeful that Jack Kerner and Kayvon Merriweather, who have both had injury scares in past seasons, can stay healthy this year, Micaiah.
Yep.
Did I sum it up well enough there?
I'm looking at this this defense, and I don't know exactly if any part of it's going to be super dominant, but the defense looks quality from top to bottom.
Okay.
Looks like a great defense.
And that kind of brings us to our last point. Because, Alex, what year after year do you bring up to me as your biggest concern with the Iowa defense? Year after year, you say the same thing over and over again.
Want me to complete that?
Yeah.
It's just a secondary.
Secondary.
In general, yeah.
Cornerbacks,
mainly.
Strength of this defense this year. Cornerbacks. You get Matt Hankins, who comes back for an extra year. Riley Moss is going to be an NFL cornerback next year. Okay. This is a very good secondary, and this is one position where I think the Iowa's got depth. Again, we haven't seen a lot of Jamari Harris, but we've seen enough to know that he can come in and play. We've seen Phil Parker groom other cornerbacks to play early and often, and Terry Roberts is a guy who's had so much experience in special teams. I think cornerback, they are set. And that is a good thing, because I think, again, what's the position? Looking at the defense overall here, guys, what's the position of weakness for Iowa defensively this year? A lot of people are going to say the defensive line, and that may be true, but isn't it overwhelming? Usually we have a position on each side of the ball where you look at that's obviously the biggest question mark. I don't see that this year. I don't see a huge question mark anywhere on defense, and I don't see a huge question mark anywhere on offense. Should I take my rosy colored glasses off? Noah.
You're probably looking through those rosy
Okay, so tell me
glasses
the biggest concern on defense, the biggest position of concern, the big question mark, right? We've always got one.
I don't think there is one on defense, but
okay. Well, hold on. Let's just stick with defense for now, Alex. The biggest question mark on defense. Do you have a big question mark defensively?
I think this is kind of a year where I'm in general across the board. I'm not real concerned at any position, but I don't think they have any real standout talent like they have in years past. So
they don't have any standout talent on defense. Matt Hankins, Riley Moss, Jack Campbell. Those guys aren't standout talent to you? Dane Belton?
Yeah, at linebacker a bit.
Dane Belton?
Yeah.
So how do you're not as confident in these corners as I am?
I'm not
but Corey,
lacking in confidence. I just don't think
it's a position of concern.
Guys.
It's always a position of concern.
It's a position of concern, but usually we have this is one thing, Alex, and this is what I'll say. Typically in an Iowa year, yeah, I can see what you're saying, because it's always a concern, but typically in an Iowa year, you're going to have one stellar cornerback that you know you can count on, right? 2015, it was Desmond King. 2017, it was Josh Jackson, right? 2019, it was Michael Ojemudia. Who is it this year? You can say, well, we don't have one. I don't agree with that. I think if Riley Moss wasn't here, we'd say Matt Hankins. If Matt Hankins wasn't here, we'd say Riley Moss. So I think we've got 2 this year. I think that's huge because, again, Ty Freifogel, Otten and Bell got, Nebraska's had tremendous recruiting class success here in recent time. Maryland touts Tua Tagovailoa's younger brother at quarterback. I don't really know their wide receiver talent right now, but typically Maryland actually has decent skill position talent. So I'm satisfied and hopeful for this cornerback room because I think there's depth and you've got 2 guys who are stellar as opposed to 1 guy, which is typically the reputation, at least in recent years under Phil Parker.
Well, like I was saying, I don't think that I'm not worried that I'm not particularly worried. I'd say I'm more confident this year at cornerback than I have been in the past. But, it's kind of been a strange thing because at Iowa we've had, like you rattle off those names, Josh Jackson and Desmond King and those guys where you had a really good, NFL corner, and yet you still had the ability to really get burned. But again, hold on though. You go back to those years when they get burned. They weren't getting burned with Desmond King and Josh Jackson. They were getting burned on the opposite side of the field because Phil Parker and this defense is set up to where they're not willing to trade cornerbacks on the opposite side of the field. So now you have that luxury of having 2 stellar guys, 1 on each side. Well, I wouldn't put either of them on the level of one of those guys, but you have 2 more solid guys as opposed to 1 extremely good guy, and then the other side of the field is kind of just attackable. So it's going to be a different, which is probably better. I mean, you'd rather not have a gaping hole in defense, even if you don't have a real stopper or somebody like Desmond King or Jackson who's can pick it off and take it back for
so you don't equate. I mean, are you comparing him to Desmond King? Or are you comparing him to Michael Ojemudia? Because I think Ojemudia was the best corner that year, but I would say Matt Hankins and Riley Moss would be right there with Ojemudia as far as skill level at this point in their careers, each one of them.
Yeah, I just think they're solid guys at this point. And I'd honestly take that probably over having 1 big powerhouse of a corner and then having, gaping holes. I'd rather have a solid secondary. So hopefully that does work. And like I said, I'm not particularly worried this year at all. I have been in the past. I'm just going into it. I'm not particularly worried. So that's a little bit of a change.
Micaiah, Noah, you guys' thoughts on cornerback. This is a position that excites me because, again, it's a concern typically year after year. And I think this is the strength of the Iowa defense.
I would probably agree with that. Alex can have his concerns or barely not be concerned this year about the corners, but
so I win, Noah. Is that what you're saying?
Well,
I'm sorry, Alex. He's
down.
gonna have to go with me. I'm sorry. He's sorry, Alex, but he's gonna have to go with me on that one.
Yeah, there you go.
Micaiah, your thoughts on Moss and Hankins?
I don't see what the problem is.
Thank you. All right, let's move on to special teams, and then we're going to kind of wrap this all up in a nutshell by making our game by game predictions to finish this podcast out. Special teams: Torrey Taylor, Ray Guy Award preseason watch list, deservedly so. Guy from Australia was tremendous last year. He's an older guy. We don't know how well. A question that was asked to him during spring practice was, are you comfortable throwing the football? Because we haven't seen Iowa run the fakes with the punter since Colton Rastetter, or Rastetler, as some people like to say, left. And so Torrey Taylor, can he develop to a point where maybe they can be a threat with him on during trick plays? That's a question mark. But he was tremendous last year punting the football, probably best in the Big Ten. Micaiah, why don't you look up punting numbers in the Big Ten? Who led the Big Ten in punting? I think it was probably Torrey Taylor last year. And then, of course, at place kicker, you lose Keith Duncan. But Kirk Ferentz has talked about it over and over again that he thought Caleb Shudak was right there with Duncan throughout Duncan's career. So I'm not concerned about Shudak. I don't think Kirk Ferentz is concerned about Shudak. So kicking is fine. How do you replace Amir Smith-Marset with kickoffs? Here's what I will say. I think that question, the question of how do you replace Amir Smith-Marset at kickoff is a valid question. But here's what people have to realize is that, especially in college, kickoffs are becoming more and more scarce. And we're seeing a greater number of touchbacks and kicks that are just simply not returnable, kicks that are going out of the end zone. So I don't think losing Smith-Marset at kickoff is a huge deal, as big of a deal as maybe you'd initially think, given his reputation there. If you look at last year, he really didn't do much. So, do you get Max Cooper to return punts? Do you get, a Quavon Matthews or a Deontay Vines, a wide receiver you trust, but just is kind of further down the depth chart? Could this be a way to sort of throw them a bone if they're good enough and be able to keep them around, as opposed to guys we know love to hit the transfer portal as soon as they miss out on the depth chart? So I'm not concerned so much about kickoff return because of that. And as of right now, going into fall camp, Noah, do you have a starter? I'm not seeing anything on my depth chart as far as somebody who is listed as the kickoff returner.
For me, and again, we've been going back and forth on this through this entire podcast about the Our Lads depth chart, but it lists a starter and a backup for both kick and punt returns.
It's almost like somebody's just coming up with this on their own. It's like not even official. It doesn't sound like it is.
Anyways, the player that they list for both kick and punt returns is Charlie Jones.
Charlie Jones. Okay. Yeah, I think we've had that on a previous depth chart, so I wouldn't be surprised if Charlie handles both. I think.
And then the other guys, like the honorable mentions, the guys listed behind him are Nico Reganey and Arlen Bruce.
Okay, I wouldn't mind seeing Arlen out there. Give him some reps as a true freshman. And again, we know Charlie can return punts. He's exceptional returning punts. Returning kicks is different, but not concerned about anything. And then Austin Spiewak is taking care of deep snaps. I'm not concerned about anything on special teams. Anybody argue with that? Anybody concerned with something special teams wise? Good. All right, let's move on to our game by game predictions. Anything else before we move on from anything position wise? Anybody have any concerns that are, again, kind of
well, we talked about our lack of defensive concerns, but I think Micaiah had a point to make about
Micaiah,
the offense.
What's your offensive concern right now?
I am a little bit concerned about depth at receiver, but
you're concerned with depth at receiver. See, that I would say the opposite. That's the one position as far as depth I'm not concerned with. I'd put tight end, running back, probably even center over depth at wide receiver. So are you just saying as far as depth that you can count on, or potential depth?
That's more the first thing than the second thing. And also you need more depth at receiver than at other position, because you run more receivers than you do.
I think you'll be I can't speak for you, Micaiah, but I think you'll be I'm not there either, but I think you'll be pleasantly surprised, because I anticipate, like Alex said, Charlie Jones taking a step forward. And I think somebody else, whether it's Arlen Bruce, Keegan Johnson, Max Cooper, there's enough wide receivers on the depth chart, or on the roster, who we've heard good things about. We know their potential. I think somebody will step into that role. Noah, do you have an overbearing concern as far as the offense?
We talked about this at length. I think the big thing for me is the tight end depth.
Hold on a second. It doesn't look like Noah's got long hair right now. Take a look at it. Take a look at it.
It's because of the chair.
I'm sorry. I had to bring that up. All right, now you look good. All right, now you got hair again. All right, go ahead. Go ahead. You said depth. Is that what you said?
Tight end depth.
Okay.
Who's going to be that guy to step up behind Porta?
Okay.
we've talked
valid,
about this
that's
at
valid.
length earlier. They run 2 or 3 tight end sets, and we don't know for sure who that guy is going to be that's going to step up and be the next guy up there.